Leeds, Leeds, Leeds.
What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, an oral history podcast about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 loiners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. My mission here is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, did during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how loiners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple and expanding crises during their day-to-day working hours. Can we turn things around? We'll find out. To tell this story, I need loiners like you, dear listener. I need people in Leeds or people from Leeds to come on this podcast and just tell me what they do all day and let me record how this affects us. Thank you for listening. What did you want to be when you grew up?
So my mum tells a great story about how I was asked what I wanted to be when I grew up when I was about 8. And I said I wanted to be a hairdresser, an airline pilot, or a virgin. I'm not sure I really knew probably what any of those jobs actually entailed. And certainly the last one, don't know why I thought that was a future career. I'm none of those three. I sadly never got to be a hairdresser or an airline pilot. And you make choices in adult life, shall we say. So,
Well, and also it's, how profitable is it to be a virgin these days?
I'm sure it works for some people, absolutely. But
I think it's a very niche field. I think you can only employ so many of them at a time.
Yeah, exactly. I've changed path from those three.
You're listening to Series 5, Episode 25, and to my guest, Lucy Moore. This is another Zoom interview recorded on the 21st of March, 2024. Hello, listener. Lucy Moore is a coin specialist, curator, Wikimedian, unpaid carer, and all-round good egg. Originally from South Lincolnshire, Lucy's been in Leeds since 2007 when she came to study at the university. She's worked in a wide range of jobs since she was 15, starting in a chip shop to save up for her fees for uni, via hog roasting and butchery, field work, care work, call centre work, and shop work, until she found herself in heritage work. She's currently Associate Curator of Numismatic and Object Collections at the University of Leeds, but at the time of recording was fresh out of a contract as Wikimedian in residence at the National Trust. If she's not busy enough, she's also studying for a PhD in early medieval coinage at the University of York, and is a trustee of Carers Leeds, Leeds Civic Trust, and the Royal Numismatic Society. When she's not working or volunteering, she's at her allotment, outdoor swimming or playing cars with her godson. Right, let's do this, episode 135 of Working Hours with Lucy Moore.
Okay, so we'll jump straight into what is it you're doing now then?
Yeah. So I learned recently the term portfolio career, which I think actually kind of sums up what I'm doing at the moment. So the biggest thing I'm focusing on right now is my PhD, which is in the Department of Archaeology at the University of York, where I look at coins that were used in medieval Britain. But I also do other things. None of us do have, we all have multiple strings to our bows. So till quite recently, I worked as a Wikimedian for the National Trust. And prior to that, I also worked as a curator in the museum service in Leeds. And then in parallel to my PhD right now, I've got a job as an administrative assistant. I've got a job that's just about to start as a research assistant. And I do some freelance work like copy editing and things. Busy.
So I'm going to pick out one of the things that you said there. So Wikimedian, what is that?
So that's a great question. So I imagine most people listening will be familiar with Wikipedia, the global encyclopedia. We're all using it every day, whether we realize it or not. And there is a kind of job role that's been developed, often for like cultural or scientific organizations, called a Wikimedian. And the role of a Wikimedian is to encourage these organizations to think about how platforms like Wikipedia, and it also has a number of other sister projects, can be used to share information at a global scale. So I was working for the National Trust. So things we were thinking about were how images of objects from its collection could be shared to reach audiences, not just online in the UK, but online in other countries. And another kind of part of the role is also working with volunteers that might be, or staff that might be involved in an organisation, and showing them how they can start to share some of their research on Wikipedia and on these sister platforms as well. So kind of two sides to that.
Well, we'll jump straight into the next question. So referring back to what you're currently doing. So how did you get into that? So what brought about the PhD and why coins?
Yeah, so I went to university and I did a degree in history way back in 2003. And in all my A-levels, I'd done loads of like Russian and Second World War history. And I was totally convinced that I was going to do Russian and Second World War history for the rest of my life. And yeah, the urge was strong. So when I was in my first term at uni, I was like, oh, I'm going to get that boring medieval history out of the way. And I did a term looking at early medieval Britain, and it blew my mind. And there was one specific week where I wrote an essay about coins, and I was just like, what's going on here? Like, why is no one talking about this? How cool are these coins? What's going on? And I've just been like really interested in money as like and coins specifically as like, cultural objects, but also, how they can tell like big, large scale, like economic stories, as well as, the fact that for lots of people throughout the past, they would be something that would be really familiar with and, quite emotionally attached to. Very few of us have enough money at the moment. And that's generally been, the same throughout the past. So, I like the emotional connection as well.
I'm thinking about a lot of things there. So let's spend some time on coins for a bit.
Okay.
I was thinking about how we want to go into this, because if somebody is a person who doesn't think about coins, let's say, which could be a lot of people, because why would you necessarily think about something that you might use every day?
Yeah.
But yeah, like the technologies within them. So I guess, so when I'm thinking about coins, I'm thinking about the purity of the metal, where the metals come from, the imprint on the metal of like what head is on it, what's the tail side, technology like sort of the beveling of the edge and putting things in them to make it a bit harder to forge these kind of things, and to prove the amount of metal, all those kind of things. So what were the things that got you interested initially, and then what were the kind of like tangents that you got taken down? Like, what are the things that you kind of like, oh, this was one that just blew my mind of like, why?
Yeah. So the kind of coin that really got me hooked is a coin called a shatter, and that was used in Britain, but also in wider Europe in the 700s. And they're about the size of sort of your little fingernail, and they have the most amazing detailed designs on them. So if you look at your little fingernail now, you'll be like, oh, that's too small, you can't do anything on it. And some of these coins, they have, bishops, their full costume, they have birds, they have like complicated geometric designs, and there's just like a huge like wealth of imagery on them. And lots of the imagery can be also quite like locally specific. So the coins from sort of the region around Southampton have a peacock on them, which is just, I just find that the fact that, you know, there's these decisions that are being made by the people, by the officials who are like issuing the coinage, to saying, oh yeah, we're going to go with peacock around here. I just love that. Lots of these designs also linked to like religious imagery as well. So for anyone who had them, there would be a bit of like connecting to like the Bible stories that they, you know, might have become familiar with. You know, this is a period when, you know, Christianity is has spread very rapidly across the British Isles. So it would be quite, you know, perhaps a more new and exciting religion than it is for some of us now. We're you know, we're very familiar with Christmas nowadays, whereas, you know, a bit of a newer phenomenon back then. And the other thing that really struck me about these coins was that these were, you know, produced in their millions. And there were coins of this type that were produced in Denmark and Germany and the Netherlands, and these could be used interchangeably with the British ones. So we find these, you know, these Dutch shatters all across Britain, but you also find ones that, you know, are more localized to places in the British Isles, found across in Europe as well. So we think, you know, this immediately makes me think about the euro, you know, and how, oh, we've got this new modern phenomenon of, you know, cross-continental money. No, it's early medieval, man, you know, and that's based on Roman coinage before, which, you know, was spread across the Roman Empire. And I think that's what I really love, is this, like, the differences in scale between the two, because you can be thinking about, you know, this money that's produced, you know, 1,200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, at this, you know, continental scale. But then you can also be looking at it in a really kind of like localized way at, you know, what's being produced in my town, and, you know, where are those coins traveling to, and can those be connected to, can we infer that they might be connected to, you know, particular movements of people or merchants, or, you know, kind of ecclesiastical figures, or, you know, kings. And then that can then sort of, you can then look at it like in a bit more at an individual level. So you can start to use, there's a big database called the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and that records metal finds made by metal detectorists across the UK. If you're a detectorist and listening, thank you very much for reporting your finds. And these are chance losses. So by and large, these are things that people in whatever period you're talking about, it fell out of their pocket, you know, they dropped it, then someone stamped on it, a horse stamped on it, you know. So then you can look at the patterns for where people have accidentally lost things, like coins, can also be jewelry, can be, you know, things to do with like horse harnesses and bridles. And you can start to then look at the patterns of like where these have been lost. And if you know where people have been losing things, you know where people were. And that's really interesting to me. And you can start to see where there are concentrations, where things are sort of in usual places, or where things are in more unusual places. And that kind of brings me on to like my PhD topic. So I work on coins that were produced in the 800s, so in the 9th century. And they're a slightly different type of coin. People commonly know them as a stiker, but people at the time probably just called them a penny. Stiker is like an invented word from the 18th century to make them seem different. But again, they're the size of your little fingernail. Instead of being made of silver, like the previous coinage was, they're made of copper alloy. So a different kind of metal. And they were produced in the north of England, in what was the Kingdom of Northumbria. And for a long time, they were just this northern phenomenon. Everywhere else was using silver coins, and during this period, the silver coins used in the rest of Britain changed and became a bit bigger. And Northumbria stuck to these like northern copper alloy coins. And because when you find them now, 1,200 years on, you know, they're very dark, they're brown, they're not as shiny as a silver coin. They've been very overlooked, which is why there's space for a PhD on them. But what I'm looking at in particular is, until quite recently, they're found primarily north of the Humber in a variety of different places. Lots in like South, North and West Yorkshire, and then kind of further up as well and into Scotland. And then any of these other finds that were found outside, you know, north of the Humber. So there's finds from Norfolk, from the south of England, from the Midlands. These were just seen as like, oh, this is weird. There's kind of no explanation for it. And then my PhD supervisor and the team that she was working with worked on a site that is called Torksey, and it was a Viking winter camp. And at this site, there's loads of these northern copper alloy coins. So suddenly you've got a place where the Vikings are. They're just coming over. This is the kind of the era where you've got groups of the army coming over, and it's a kind of stereotypical sort of raiding and pillaging time. But, it's also a lot of treaties and bartering and saying, well, we're going to set up camp here. We won't attack you if you, pay us some tribute. So it's quite a wheeler dealing time, really. More than, there is a lot of violence, but I think that political machinations and the deals, it feels very Del Boy to me.
Have you read Debt, the David Graeber book?
Yeah.
So he talks about that with the Vikings is like, I think some of it is just, because they were good traders, that they developed this reputation of like, you feel seen off because if someone's like really good at doing the deal, it's like, yeah, I've agreed to that. Hang on. I just got seen off then, didn't I?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's definitely lots of that. Yeah, it feels very, it's very, who got the better end of this bargain? It's not likely.
I used to have a castle.
Yeah, for sure. Where did all my cattle go? I just don't know. Hang on. Is that what I agreed to? I didn't think that's what I agreed to. I think there's a lot of that going on. But then this opened up this whole world for these northern copper alloy coins, where it's like, oh, well, hang on, if these in this place are associated with, Vikings coming and, doing their deals, then what about the others that are found in other parts of the country? And my job as part of my PhD is to try and disentangle all that information. And these coins were, produced in their in their hundreds of thousands. I'll put my name on the line there. So they're produced in huge numbers. So there's quite a lot of data to work with. And often, sort of in the past, people have said, oh, they're kind of a bit of a shitty coin. Oh, let's ignore them. But I would argue that they're a coin that's of a lower value. They're produced in huge numbers, and they're found in lots of different places. So, it shows that actually this coinage is being used. It's being used regularly. So it's a very it's a very vital, type of money. It's not just sat somewhere kind of as savings. People are, using it in perhaps not a daily transaction, but certainly in like weekly transactions that they'll be making. So that's my coin job, which little Lucy, when she was 18, whose little mind was blown, would be like so proud of me for doing this right now. She's like, what? I can't believe you got that. OMG.
I was thinking towards the end of that as well. Where there's muck, there's brass.
Yeah, so that's the title of someone else's book on coinage from this period. A guy also from Leeds called Tony Abramson, and that's what he called the book that he wrote about it. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, let's. I'm thinking, should we stay on coins? Because I could spend a lot of time on this. Let's move on with questions. I mean, do you want to say anything about the admin job? Was that just a sort of like, is it part-time to support you through your studies? Is it something that you came to, or is it more of a...
Yeah, so actually, it's through the University of York as well. So it's working on it's working on a research project that's called Bespoke Open Collaborative Cataloguing. And basically, it's a group of researchers who are trying to explore ways to make museum and heritage cataloguing more inclusive of more perspectives. So you might be thinking, what on earth? What does she mean by that? That sounds like museum gobbledygook. So a really important aspect of working in a museum is not just like knowing where your things are, but knowing what you have, and having it described. And often people think that there will be that, the museum is an authority, the authority, and therefore its records must be the, they must be telling the truth about the object. But if you think about, if you think about anything that you're looking at as, you're driving your car or sat in your room or whatever, everything in our lives has like multiple stories to tell.
Think of an Amazon listing now. If you think of a product on Amazon now, like how long their names are because of search engine optimization and stuff. It's like, it's called everything that you would ever search for when you think of this product.
Exactly. So museum catalogues tend to be, written by perhaps 1 to 2 people. They might be built up over time, but it's not got a huge number of different perspectives. And that's becoming more and more important, that we do try and include more voices, because no one person can know everything. No human is an encyclopedia. And particularly when you're thinking about objects that might have different cultural meanings for different communities, or objects that might, you might just have different political viewpoints about something. It's really important that these multiple voices are collected as part of the history of the object. So trying to think of like a good example, or maybe one's kind of jumped to your mind.
Elgin marbles, something like that.
Yeah, Parthenon marbles. Yeah. So 2 very different narratives there. Well, names there. With those, obviously the marbles that are the British Museum, lots of people in Greece want them back and believe they were taken illegally. It's not my area of expertise, but what I will say is that whether you think the British Museum should keep them or whether you think they should go back, it's 2 sides of the same sort of colonial argument, and you're engaging with this, idea of.
But there's a level of inheritance, isn't there, of like whose heritage is this?
Yeah.
And then there's this supposedly global perspective where it's an entire humanist. We all inherit this. It's all our history kind of thing. And then there's no, this is our national history. This is our identity kind of thing. And then if someone takes it somewhere else, and then you're like, well, no, it's ours. And then it's like, well, no, it's too important to be just yours. And all of those kind of conversations.
And like who owns history and who
gets to label it and name it, and why do you get to put a name on this when you were the person that was responsible for this terrible thing that it's called, and we call it something different.
Yeah, exactly. But it's kind of I think it's also kind of staying within this, like, so the point I'm trying to make is like, whether you think they should stay in the UK or whether you think that they should go back to Greece. But those are 2 sides of the same kind of argument about the colonial past. So, and, I don't necessarily think any institution should own its collections. Like, I don't necessarily think if we are going to have a global and humanitarian history, then I'm not sure that ownership in any form is good. But then we're moving into like the Super Galactic Museum Alliance, which would just be a whole other range of admin. But it's still, it's still a very kind of colonial thing. The British were colonists and took them, and we want them back. I don't think that they should remain in Britain, but it's not moving the argument further forward.
Yeah.
It's just still kind of doing a like colonial, back and forward with with these objects, which kind of, and that's almost kind of, now become the bigger thing about them. Not about anything to do with their ancient Greek past, really, necessarily. It's almost now become so much more about this, like, about British colonialism. And that seems like, I mean, you should probably get someone who's Greek to talk in much better and much more.
You don't have to solve it right now in this conversation. It's not your responsibility.
I can't.
Exactly. Nothing you say on here is legally binding, and you're not responsible for. What's happening with ancient artifacts?
But anyway, the admin job basically is supporting a project to find more ways to have more voices in a catalogue record for a museum.
It's one of those things where, so the way that I'm imagining the job is that the job is an admin job where you're sending emails and doing spreadsheets and stuff. But the thing around it is like, oh, this is a really interesting kind of area. So you get to have fairly interesting conversations and overhear various interesting discussions. But you're just doing the usual sort.
Yeah. Booking catering, booking rail travel.
Doing expenses.
Yes.
Timesheets.
But it's what keeps the world going round.
Yeah, exactly. Moving things from one column to the other column.
I went to a really amazing talk that was about the administration of the railways during the First World War. And it might not sound super interesting to everyone, but it really was, because it talked about
how do you do that without computers and
how do you do that?
Telephone?
So how do you keep things running as much as possible, and how do you plan in advance, and what are your mitigations? And it was all this kind of work that, of like risk management and, project management, but it was just so fascinating. And then we see, newspapers reporting issues about, issues that the Russian army is facing on its way to Ukraine or in Ukraine. And I just keep thinking, they should have gone to this talk by a historian called Chris at the University of Leeds, because it would have explained all their problems, But not that we really want those problems to be solved, I should add. But yeah.
I know what you mean though. Yeah, it's all about supply and logistics. I mean, the whole thing, globalization, 20th century globalization, most of that is off the back of American logistics, intelligence, innovations and so on that happened during the Second World War and after. And like a lot of this management training and stuff, loads of that comes out of military and the military operations and so on. And it's, we think about, often we're encouraged to think about technology in a very siloed way. Technology, like one of the best things someone told me of thinking of technology is a tool, and a tool can be anything. So it can be language, it can be politics, it could be religion. They're technologies as well. I think that's a really interesting way to open things up, because when you think of things because they're all human made, aren't they? They're like conceptual, whether it's a physical objects or not. It was a concept first. And,
yeah.
So So I just want to spend a little bit of time on the PhD itself. How is that? Like, in terms of workload and the pressure for it, and did you start after lockdown?
I started just before lockdown. Right. It's really hard. Like, I find it very hard because I've been balancing so many other things. I also have been doing a lot of care support from my mum, who's been really ill recently, and not so recently as well. And I would say that PhDs are not set up for people who have dependents. That it's not a system that's set up for you if you are coming to do a PhD with, I would say a more complicated life, but it's not a more complicated life. It's just a life that's not of a, 23 to 26-year-old. And so, for example, carers leave, which this is my current bugbear, carers leave, which increasing numbers of employers offer, not perhaps to the extent that they should, it doesn't exist as part of PhD grant. So you're then having to take unpaid leaves of absence to undertake caring duties, which can only be done a month at a time. And I'm very lucky in that my PhD is funded and paid for, so I do get a grant. But the full-time salary for that is like I think 18 grand a year, which is very low. I think it's it's barely minimum wage, which is that's what it is. But when you are start to think about doing a PhD, it's sold as a professional qualification, and it's very much sold by universities as, as something that you can do as a full-time job, and you can do it as a full-time job, but you do also need to be focusing on it. And if you have other things going on in your life, it's really hard to focus in the level of detail that it needs. And there's also, a number of times I've come across this kind of like expectation that the PhD should come before everything. And I'm sorry, that's not healthy for anybody.
Yeah, it's like the institutional view, is it? Because they're the institution, and they're like, well, surely this is the most important thing in the world for you right now. It's like, no, I have a life.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be really significant things that are happening to you, but it can also just be keeping your sense of like being a human.
Yeah.
And that
keeping up with your social skills when all you're doing is reading about coins and nobody else in the world is thinking about them, and you're spending hours on end of a week going, oh, coins and dirt and this little detail. And like, you can't talk to other people about things like that. I mean, you can in births, but most people don't want to hear hours and hours.
No, you're right. Most people don't want that. So I guess the physical work of doing a PhD is mostly reading and doing spreadsheets. And I also use mapping software quite a lot. My PhD is in collaboration with the Yorkshire Museum. So pre-pandemic, I was like in the collection and like working with the coins and photographing them all, which was great. But like that had kind of sort of come to an end before the pandemic hit as well. So lots of screen time doing a PhD for sure. Sure.
Okay, well, we've mentioned the pandemic a couple of times. So let's jump into the questions. So I'll start with COVID and lockdown. So I want you to think, first part of the questions, and initially going into lockdown, how much were you working? Did it increase your workflow? Or did the work drop off? Like, was there any change for you there? And coming out of lockdown, has there been any kind of permanent changes to the way you work or anything you notice that's different post-pandemic?
Yeah, so...
I shouldn't say post-pandemic, should I? Because we're not.
No, it's still going on. So in March 2020, I was doing my PhD full-time at the University of York, and I was working for Leeds Museums and Galleries 1 day a week. And that was fine. I just got it kind of balanced. And I think one of the things I really noticed working part-time was this kind of sudden expectation that you could be free, not just on like your work day, but on all the days of the week. And I think a lot of other people notice this as well. And I find it quite hard to say no to people anyway. And I definitely found it very hard to say no to like wanting to be involved as well. And so my kind of previously, my working week had been like Monday to Thursday in York, working. We have a workroom there in the department. And then like 1 day a week, like in the museum, usually the Discovery Centre, which is like down near the Royal Armouries, and is the store where everything that's not on display is kept. And then like suddenly you're like at home, you're getting to grips with Zoom and Teams and, Jitsi and all the other, video programs. And I took a load of books out of the library because I was like, I think maybe I'll take some extra things. But, we were then all suddenly living in such a like high time of anxiety. And, I was lucky in that I suspect I probably have had COVID, but I haven't had a positive like COVID test yet. But, people that were getting, we all know what it was like, everyone was ill. And like, I remember lying in bed and saying to my partner, are we going to die? Like, I think it was like early one morning. I was like, do you think we're going to die? Like, and it had never, it had never sort of, when you're, you think you're kind of immortal until you're not. And it was really like, it really kind of not, yeah, it troubled me, the fact that I was like thinking seriously about this. As it should, as it does for us all, So I think, in terms of my working life, anxiety about, a global pandemic does interfere with your concentration. So it makes it harder to think about, the tiny details of early medieval coinage. And then with like this kind of,
or why you should even bother.
Yeah, I mean,
who cares about this?
Yeah, why
it's totally unimportant.
Useful. Yeah, one of my mates, one of my really good friends, at the same time as I'm like in my room, being like, oh, but the distribution of this specific kind of coin was literally working on one of like the COVID vaccines, like literally like working all the time to like try and save the world, and it definitely like puts your own achievements into perspective when you're like, oh, that's my mate Rachel Tanner. Yeah, there she is, writing the paper that is signs off essentially one of our vaccines. But we can't all be Rachels. What can I say? Do things differently. So my working pattern, it did change. It's hard as well, and I found it very hard to be like separated from my family, and like my partner became really unwell. Their mental health became very poor, and there's a lot of
it was really hard time. Which
really
is like
hard.
If you tell people, oh, everyone had to stay home for a few months, it sounds like nothing, doesn't it? But like that really doesn't explain what that is or what it did to us all.
And it's so intangible, because like you can look at it, like I was like, oh, I should like take some photographs and like try and document stuff a bit. But like I think the best one I've got is like of an enormous queue at B&Q, when we could go out a little bit, and everyone was like, oh, better sort my garden. So I was like at the Beast and B&Q, and the queue was going all the way like round the car park down to like Burger King, and it was really long. But it's like that doesn't really capture like the intense moments of like anxiety, depression, confusion. And I think also a lot of the time I certainly was quite confused about what I should be doing, how I should be doing it, how was I meant to be protecting others? Was I doing this right? Was I doing that right? Was it like, and that was, and I was trying really hard to follow all the guidance. And it comes back to this point of administration,
which changed every day.
Yeah, which changed every day by people who didn't know
sometimes more than once a day,
and would not listen to expert advice.
Yep.
So thanks very much for that, Boris. Well,
and the news.
Yeah. Well, true. So it was hard, very hard.
I mean, I'm surprised you kept going with the PhD. I mean, like, so yeah, but so many people like they drop out and stuff. Like that must have been really hard, because there's the whole sort of thing of being like, well, what is the point of this? Why am I doing it? Like, there's all these other pulls in different directions. You've got all this time. There must have been sort of like times where you're like, well, I should get out and be doing work in here, or I should do this, or like I'm not really spending the time, because it must have been incredibly difficult to spend really any time. I mean, it depends how you work and how you study, but sort of for me, I know that getting online to look at a thing, to study a thing, like that would have been really, really difficult for me. That I would have had such a hard time to kind of do that, because I need to go to somewhere like the library or something and like go into the place and that whole sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that must have been really hard.
Yeah. I mean, I am good at working from home now. I wasn't pre-pandemic, but now I'm pretty good at working from home. So that is a positive to come out of it. I think it's like, it sounds slightly cliched, it does help you to have hope, if you like. So like quite soon after I started my PhD, one of my supervisors said, "Oh, well, your thesis that you produce on this, that will probably be the reference work for, like 25 to 50 years, because realistically, not that many people are going to work on this. It is fairly niche, important, but niche." And that kind of gives you a bit of hope, because you're sort of like, oh, well, if I don't try and do this now, it's not just the impact of like talking to people about it now, but it's,
it might not get done for hundreds of years still.
I mean, I hope somebody is listening and is like, I really want to do a PhD on this, and they're going to come and like totally debunk everything I come out with, and there'll be a great debate and it'll be wonderful. But that does kind of give you a bit of hope that, actually there's not just a difference you can make right now, but like a future difference. And that I think also certainly keeps me quite humble, because it's not like I'm doing this, for me today. It's more about, well, who's going to be reading this, and disagreeing probably, but when I'm, certainly retired, or, maybe after I've passed away. So it's meant to be very hopeful, but now I'm talking about my own imminent demise. So let's move on now.
All right. Well, okay. So my 3 jolly questions that we've got coming up. So we'll do social media, because that's the least offensive, the remaining 2. Even that's debatable. So social media, do you have to do much of it for your work? And if you do, is it useful to your work? Do you know what you're doing? And like, do you get the results that you want from social media?
Tricky one. So like none of my jobs, like past or now, like depend on me doing social media. Although, like when I worked at the museum, we really wanted to contribute to like the museum's like social media posts, and to, highlight things to the people who were expert in that. And so, is this something that could be featured? I think being good at social media is expertise. And if you're, thinking about like a career in any kind of like public history or public archaeology, being a curator, or, being an academic or whatever, you do have to have this like public profile, which I'm not sure I'm the best at doing, or the most effective at doing. So there's lots of different spaces now where you have different content, and where you're in touch with different people for different things. And I keep thinking, as part of my, and like we were saying in sort of the preamble, video content's becoming so much more important now. So I keep thinking, for some of the volunteering that I do with Wikipedia, or for some of my academic work, that I actually need to get better at, making video, because that does get so much more traction due to the nature of the beast.
That's the counterintuitive sort of thing about social media, though, isn't it? It's that thing of, because it's work and because it's professional, you want to do it to a good standard. You want to do it like well. But the reality is, social media, like, it isn't about quality. It's about quantity and co-production of nonsense. But it's all about that. Like, the amount of times people say the sort of thing of like, oh, I spend ages on my posts and stuff, and then I do one throwaway one, or one of my dog, and it goes wild. And it's like, all of these things. And if you put in too much effort into something, like if you think of it curation wise, and you're doing it onto one of these sites, like, I mean, how much longer have Twitter and Facebook really got? Like, really?
Yeah.
And when they go, or when they delete your account, all of that work's gone. Unless you're curating it yourself, it's just gone. And I think that's the way you have to think about producing for it, unless you're making something that you are going to create that's like good content. Like if you were going to make a documentary on the coins and like the detail and stuff that was done well, that would be something you would keep and kind of put everywhere, I guess, or put clips of everywhere. But you wouldn't. I wouldn't entrust it to these sort of platforms to curate it.
Yeah. It's and you have to, I think, sometimes be quite like deliberate about what you do. So I worked as a Wikimedian, but I also like volunteer and edit Wikipedia. Like most of Wikipedia is created by volunteers around the world. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is writing about women on Wikipedia. And I recently finished a sort of global challenge to write about a woman from every country in the world, purely as a volunteer. And I thought, I wonder if this is a story. I'm not sure if this is a story. Would Ali be interested in this? So I thought, I'm going to give it a go, because it's really important that we talk about, how gender is unequal on, Wikipedia, but also, in our wider lives. So I was like very deliberate. I got my hair cut because, we live in a patriarchal society where women are judged by their looks. Because I knew I was going to make a video, and I made a video sort of, and I just said, this is what I've done, slightly too intensely to the camera. And I posted it, I subtitled it and I posted it. Because I thought, actually, this will have a greater chance of someone seeing it and then like engaging with the idea of the story much more than me writing a long thread or just like, a picture of a flower with me saying, I've done this thing. It doesn't get it. So I was quite sort of deliberate about that. The fact that the story then got caught by like a number of other sort of news places took me very much by surprise. I was hoping for radio leads, not the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Hi, radio leads. Still not covered me. But like, so there is this kind of like, goes back to this point, you have to have expertise, which I necessarily have. You need to plan, and you need to kind of be aware that you are exposing yourself and become.
Please, there are ladies present.
Exactly. But you're like in like a like, this is me. You know that people are gonna like, may or may not be commenting on like how you talk, how you're dressed.
Yeah, but that's your production side, isn't it? It's that it's the thinking of, I'm going to produce a thing and I'm going to make it fairly professionally because I'm a fairly serious person, like I am a serious person being serious and doing a serious thing, but nobody cares. But once you press kind of post, it kind of becomes unserious because it's just being thrown into this ocean of noise. And it'll go wherever. In most cases, it'll just sink to the bottom, but occasionally it'll, spin all over the place to the top. So you got to. It's a weird one to balance. I know I've got to do a load of video stuff and like video posts and stuff. It'll be the best thing that I can do in terms of getting the results that I want from posts and so on. But I really don't want to do it. Like I was saying to you about the video and stuff. I mean, I've got this stupid snooty on this morning. My hair's like as bouffant as it possibly be. And I should just make the videos and it doesn't matter because it's not like anyone's going to curate all of those and go, oh, look at you and how unprofessional you looked here. Nobody cares. It's like the stuff that hits. And and that's what you want. You just want these things to hit and people to click on the other thing that you want them to click on, not this thing. But we get caught up in, because it's our work. It's work that we're producing and we want to produce something good. So it's a weird trap, social media, I think.
Yeah.
I have to get into this mindset of just do it and it doesn't matter.
I guess I think maybe I think I probably perceive it a bit differently because I'm a woman. And like I've been featured in the press previously where like there were loads of like really horrendous comments about like what I look like, my face, my features, what I was wearing, like how thin I was or not thin. So having been on the receiving end of that kind of misogyny, very publicly, you know, you, it's not nice, and it does make you then think differently. You know, I definitely got you know, my fringe cut in because I was like, I want to have like nicer hair if I do this throwaway video that's meant to look super casual. Because you know that there's this really high risk that people will gang up and bully you. And like, we had a reporter come round to like take some pictures for one of the papers, and I spent like the hour before like finding my makeup. Where have I put my makeup? I don't know. I don't wear it every day. And then like, you know, curling my eyelashes. I don't know when I last did that. You know, painting my nails, frantically painting my nails as the photographer was knocking on the door. And my partner was like, why are you bothering with all this? Don't bother with this. And I was like, because someone somewhere might be like, oh, look at her. She's not painted her nails. She didn't put any makeup on, you know. And it makes people take you, particularly if they're unsure about your message or your story, it does make people take you less seriously if you're a woman, or if you're, you know, kind of another, you know, marginalized gender, you know. And so I do think there is perhaps a sort of a difference in the perception of throwaway, and yeah, whether you're a man or a woman kind of doing it.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Yeah, it's setting me off thinking about other things again. So do we want to spend any more time on social media? I think that's a good capper on that.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, cool. So we'll do Brexit, and then we'll do climate change. So Brexit's a terrible topic, but this is just about how it affects your work. So have you noticed any change in your work since we have Brexited?
Yeah, so when I was working in museums, there was a lot of discussion about how Brexit was going to impact international loans between museums, particularly artwork.
Of items. And...
Yeah. So there's I don't know. So if you go to like a special exhibition, like in an art gallery or a museum, it's very likely that lots of the pieces in it will have come from lots of other organisations. That's what we mean when we say a loan. So the art gallery at Leeds is constantly sending out artworks and sculptures to other institutions because the collection there is really amazing. And likewise for shows that happen, you know, in any organisation, there'll be other loans coming in. And that might be an international, you know, piece of sculpture, or it might be, you know, a collection from a very local person of, you know, their favourite, I don't know, football cards from when they were growing up or something, you know. And every loan's treated with the same like seriousness and deliberacy, regardless. So there's a lot of discussion about how Brexit would impact museum loans. I think for my academic work, it's been more about the impact Brexit will have on funding. So there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether European funding could still be accessed from British universities post-Brexit. And I think there's been some kind of concordance that's come that we might be able to access some of it. I've not been following it very closely because I've had other stuff to deal with. But it was really, really worrying because a lot of the big university-led research projects are dependent on collaborative funding from the European Union. So there's a lot of worry about, you know, where might future jobs be, or what will happen to, you know, friends and colleagues who are here on that funding, you know, and how will that impact future jobs kind of in the sector. So
and how will this make anything better?
Yeah, exactly. And like, why do you want to stop funding cutting edge research?
Because we don't like science anymore, because science tells us things we don't want to hear, and we don't want to hear those things. So science can be quiet, please. And it can be quiet if we take all the money off it, and then it just shuts up.
Yeah. Not entirely sure of that logic, but if you do defund things, then, you know, that's one way to certainly change how they are run.
To make sure that they don't exist in your part of the world. And that's pretty much all it does.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Brexit is, I am not a fan of the idea. I was really cross with the whole Remain campaign for just being not engaging with like the idea that actually,
not trying.
Yeah, like actually, the concept of like being part of something, being part of a collective, which will work in lots of ways and won't work in some because nothing is perfect, was just never really addressed. And, its role as, peacemaking, it was just ignored. And I think there was a real missed opportunity there to actually put across a point of what, being closely connected to, countries and people and places that are allied to you can bring. My mum works in agricultural engineering, and lots of her customers really wanted to leave the EU, and then they've all come back kind of in the last sort of year or so and gone, that was a really terrible decision, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And my mum has gone, I told you.
Yeah.
And it's things like, it used to take 24 hours or less for a tractor part to arrive from Europe. Now it takes a fortnight.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're in the middle of harvest, which is, time sensitive, you can't get something for the following day. 2-week wait. And the routes that things are coming into Britain with are sometimes quite ludicrous, and stuff gets held up. And then, my mum's business couldn't, deliver things that its customers wanted on time, but also customers are then angry because the business can't deliver what it wants, but there's no alternative. Goes back to administration again. Having a good, solid administration and logistics really helps your country flourish.
Yeah, people don't understand, like, because of the media and like red tape and stuff, people really don't understand the vital necessity of bureaucracy, of like, you don't just move shit across the world. Like, that's not how things happen. Like, you need someone to plan, to make sure all the things happen at the right time in the right pieces, and all of that has to be, if you want to do it again, has to be documented. And if you want other people to be able to do it again, has to be documented in an open, understandable way. It's like, that's how you get civilization. It's not just sexy people doing like, oh, I'm all amazing and I'm a great person and I've conquered this and I've done that. It's like loads of people writing boring tables.
Irrigation.
Yeah.
Getting those water wheels going. All of that.
Yeah. So we're going to climate change. Since we're on the big questions now. Solving the world's problems.
Yeah.
So, again, looking at it through a lens of work, this is a weird one because it's odd how people take this, because sometimes people take it about their own personal responsibility of what they do in their role or their organization or something else, or they don't necessarily think of climate impacts. Like some people will think of, say, the 39-degree heat day, and other people will be like, oh no, it doesn't affect my work at all. So from your point of view, how does climate change sort of impact your work? And in your work, is there anything you can do to encourage adaptation, mitigation, or just awareness raising?
Yeah. So I think there's there are things that like I do and have done. So if we take my like admin job first of all, so one of the things that we do there is like all of our like catering is like veggie or vegan now. So we're like doing just like a tiny step to reduce like the impacts of like the meat industry. But I do think that is like an important one to take.
And dairy.
Yeah, and dairy. Yeah, of course. But not everyone, like a pure vegan buffet does sometimes still get complaints, unfortunately. But trying to make that reduction. So that's kind of like a small practical thing that we do. At a kind of more conceptual scale, the climate crisis is a huge topic in archaeology, both in terms of like how it's impacting what's in the ground, what's above the ground, but also like the future of archaeology and the impact of plastic, in archaeology of the future, and kind of the present. And it's not my area of expertise, but there's lots of colleagues at York who are working on that. But it's thinking about, will things be preserved, in the future? So lots of archaeology is lots of archaeology is preserved when it's in like a waterlogged condition. So up at Hadrian's Wall, there's like a site called Vindolanda, and lots of material, including writing tablets and things, is preserved because of the waterlogged conditions. But as we dry out, as bogs dry out, these incredibly precious, objects become increasingly at risk. And it's the same with coastal erosion. If you're looking at any kind of site, not necessarily even that close to the the cliff edge, but coastal erosion destabilizes the land, destabilizes the extent that you might be able to work. And we do have sites that are like falling into the sea, and sometimes that has a research positive in that cliffs can reveal new archaeology, but there's also a fact that you are then in a kind of crisis mode of what can you then record and how quickly and what has been lost. So I would say that climate has a big kind of impact on sort of the archaeology world, and in the kind of like Wikipedia world, where I still do a bit of freelancing, there is a lot of concern about sustainability in the Wikimedia movement, around tech and so on, but also how can volunteer editors like me contribute to raising awareness of the climate crisis. And what we tend to do, we're sort of organised into different kind of projects and things. But one of the things we do is kind of try and just include information about climate crisis where it is evidenced and referenced in pages across Wikipedia, so that when you're going to, like, I don't know, a stately home, there might then be a short section on the impact of climate change on, the fabric of the building and of, the natural surroundings. And, climate deniers might be like, oh, that's, you shouldn't be doing that. That's biased. But it's not biased if it's scientific evidence that you are presenting in a neutral way. And I think the more that people encounter this kind of material, particularly when they're not necessarily expecting it, the more that we can start, not necessarily to change the minds of climate deniers who are firmly entrenched, for people who might be a bit more unsure or who don't feel like they've got the expertise to weigh up the evidence kind of independently for themselves. I think we can then start to move more people into taking, the future of our planet more seriously.
I mean, like, one of the things that annoys me, like, so firstly, there are so few places to talk about the most important issue of our time, like, and the amount of discussion that happens on it is shockingly small. And the other thing is that, and part of the reason for that is, like, every time, how many times do you watch these things where there's some expert talking about a thing, and like two people talking, whatever it is, politics, economics, whatever, talking about the future, and they don't mention climate once. It's like, you're not serious people. You're not talking about the future. You're talking about you're talking about the present. You're talking about now forever, and as if nothing else will change around that. Like, that is not a serious person. You don't know what's going to happen in this market, in this field, in this subject, in this area, because it might not exist. Like, you might not exist. Like, the whole thing could have burned up. It could be under 6 meters of sea. It could be anything.
Yeah.
You don't know. Like, and until you actually address the reality of that in your spurious speculation about the thing you want to sell, then you're not a serious person as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and I think the thing that I find very infuriating is that for organisations, like Just Stop Oil and like others that do want to press, the urgency of the issues around our climate, they're being stymied at every point, either by the press refusing to report on them now because, they want coverage, so they're cutting them off, or, by the government putting draconian measures on people who are just saying, hey, we don't want, our planet to die. And that's, and that's what I mean. But that goes back to this idea.
But there are people that do because they're profiting from it.
Well,
and, and they have most of the levers of power and media. And
it's true. Yeah. Yeah. But then also, can't enjoy your billions on a dead planet.
Like, but they can enjoy that nobody else got to enjoy it. That's what they enjoy.
Very mean thinking.
Yeah,
not very kind.
They're not. They're not like selfless people, are they? They're not like normal reciprocal people. They're everything for me people.
Yeah. Although I do take a bit of hope from, I can't remember the name of the organisation, but it's they're called something like Billionaires for Philanthropy or something, and they're the people who are giving away all their money.
See, I don't buy any of that. They're like philanthropy washing, where they pay for a new wing on a school. It's like, oh, I've murdered everybody in the world, but I bought this school wing, so now everyone thinks I'm great.
I don't know. I think there are some examples of it being good. There's that Austrian woman who inherited a shitload of money, and she set up a citizens' assembly to decide what should be done with it.
That's a good one.
And she'll be left, she'll just be left working a normal job. And she's like, this isn't my money. I did nothing for it. This should benefit people in Austria. And there was another kind of like I agree with like philanthropy washing as a concept, but I think there are some people who are genuinely giving away their fortunes. And I hope more coverage is given to them, because even if some of the world's richest people just gave away a little bit, it could address serious issues. And I hope they're listening, quite frankly.
But it smacks to me of that thing of it's that.
It's a sticky factor.
Well, it's like only the rich can do good sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's like that thing that they always sell you of, you can have the Walden lifestyle. You can go and live in your cabin in the woods, but you got to work in the city for a few years first. Getting down and dirty and like get sick of like, hey man, the way that we make this money, it's like all wrong. So I'm going to live in the woods. So, but I can't, live in a commune in my house right here in the city and rewild this spot. I mean, I don't have the resources and capability at the moment, but factually I could have the right thing. But that's not the story that we sell or that we tell. It's always go out of the city into the wilderness, into the authentic and away from the machine sort of thing. And I don't think that helps. I don't like those narratives have been around for a long time, haven't helped us at all with what we're actually to tackle.
Yeah, it's running away a bit. But I don't know. I still think, with the present climate, the present politics, if a billionaire does want to, solve an issue, please, and maybe that will then, we can then start to have these bigger conversations about, well, actually, this vaccine has now been developed and it was funded by this person, and we couldn't do it because wealth is unequally distributed and there isn't, a way that we can, democratically press for the issues that matter to us most. We don't have mechanisms for that. So perhaps if you have some of these, I mean, I'm an optimist. So, perhaps if you have some of these things happen, you can then press for further change. And, if governments see that it's popular, and it's not, harming a billionaire that much, maybe we can have some higher taxes, maybe. That would be nice.
Okay, so we've done Brexit, we've done climate change. Do you want to add any more on climate change before I move on?
No, I'm all right. All right on climate change.
That's enough climate change for me today, thank you.
Yep. Yes, I've done my dose.
I'm quite full now.
Yeah. It's bitter.
and it gives me an awful headache. Okay, so more positive questions. So firstly, I'm going to put you in charge. You're going to become the all-powerful one, and you're going to be in charge of your job, and you can change anything you want about your job. What would you change?
Oh, I mean, which job? And
Either, both,
any or so I think, does it have to be something that's very specific, or can it be quite general?
No, you can be general. Like you can be like, oh, I wish my job created world peace if you want, but so you can be fantastic or you can be really pragmatic.
Okay.
You can be like, maybe we need more pens in the office. I don't.
Yeah, coloured pens perhaps actually.
Not highlighters.
Not
People get
highlight.
mad for highlighters. Like if you do you do the stationery?
No,
You order the stationery. So you order it, like you have to watch highlighters like a hawk because people just have them straight away.
Yeah. So I think for my sort of university work, I would raise the stipends and the working conditions for people who are doing PhDs, and I would make them equitable with an actual job. People say it's a job, it's not a job. You kind of get treated like you're a professional, but then you also get really infantilized sometimes. So I would professionalize doing a PhD, proper wages for the proper groundbreaking world-leading research that we're doing, with the appropriate like network of support, as you know I talked about earlier, for caring responsibilities. But that goes for everything else. Maternity pay, things like that. So yeah, that would be kind of my major and serious change. And yeah. I think maybe a sort of, actually, I was going to say a sillier one, but it's not silly at all. It's like, so I work in like the humanities, although archaeology, you know, kind of is a bit of a spectrum of humanities to science, but I'm more on the humanities side. But I would change this perception that like humanities are a waste of time that we see quite often in the press now. You know, if you can't think critically, however you're learning to do that, whether that's through literature or languages or history or archaeology or whatever, or music, if you can't think critically, then you can't challenge things. And that's why the humanities are under pressure, is because it, you know, encourages people to think independently about the systems that are in place.
About everything, really.
Yeah. But particularly for our previous conversation, the systems that are in place.
It makes you ask questions about things people who don't want you to ask questions.
Yeah, exactly. So I would change this idea that asking questions is a bad thing. Asking questions is a good thing, and there should be more be done to encourage curiosity. And it's, you know, a sad reflection of our times that curiosity is often seen by authorities as a bad thing, and that we should be on a treadmill and we should just be doing factual things, and that we shouldn't be using our minds in a creative way.
Certain factual things, because some facts aren't allowed.
Well, yeah, as we know, science. I don't know. Like, it's So more question asking. Like, I hit people all the time going, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've got a question." Why are you apologizing that you've got a question? Like, questions are how we move. Like, you know, I don't know can I ask where I'm going? Yes, you can, of course. Like, but don't apologize for it. Like, they're how we move our thinking, they're how we move our bodies, they're how we, you know, move all our different relationships between people. You know, question asking is fundamental to being human. And this kind of discouragement that we shouldn't be using that skill is really sad to me.
That's making me think of social media in terms of, so quick example, when I learned to tell this, I'm dyslexic. When I learned to tell the time, like from, you know, the clock face, I remember doing that in primary school. And then growing up in the 80s, it was all about digital watches. You know, there were the mobile phones of the 80s because they could do various things. Like, look, mine's got a calculator on it. It does this, that, and the other. But using digital watches and digital readouts, I forgot how to tell the time on a clock face. Like, not entirely, but because I'm not used to it, I couldn't do it fast. So I had to, you know, think about it. And I think we're doing a similar thing with social media and with the internet, where we're kind of like, there's this, you don't need to think or know or anything. Just look in there and it'll tell you where to go, what to do, what to say, what happened, who to be, you know. And this sort of lack of personal independence, like of knowing stuff, of like knowing how to get there, knowing where to be, knowing where to go, knowing how to be, all of those kind of things, or just knowing stuff.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't need to know that. When was the Battle of Plessis? I don't know. I'll look it up.
Yeah. And you can do that. That's fine. No one needs to know necessarily when that was, but you should know how to find out where it was. And you should, if you are curious about it, like, it'd be fine to be curious about it, and like it to be, you know, questioning things and wanting to find the answer to things isn't necessarily the same as remembering the answer. You know, it's two different things.
Yeah. Well, and even knowing something about something, just because you know like a name and a date, doesn't prove that you know anything about the actual thing or its context or what happened or anything. It's like, oh, right, where you can learn a couple of things that you can respond with.
Yeah. I was chatting to someone recently. This is the flip side of like question asking. And they said that they had stopped asking questions. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, oh, I just don't question things now. I'm much happier. I mean, I'm not going to argue with your happiness, but I'm not. Is that happiness? Or is that just like having a position where you can disengage from the world? I don't know. Like,
is it disengagement or is it more engagement? Is the questioning, you know, are you standing back and abstracting and trying to be objective when you're asking broader questions?
You know, it was more like
distance between yourself and the world.
Yeah, I could see that interpreted, but it was more like I'm just not.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah,
and I can see something with it. It's just like, is it worth knowing anything? Is it worth knowing stuff? Like, doesn't it just hurt more if you know stuff?
Yeah.
There is a level of that. Yeah, I can see. I can see the attraction. But yeah, no, it is good to know stuff.
I think I just end up like worrying about what I wasn't worrying about, and like trying to like block everything out.
I don't think it's doable either. It's one of those things where you'd get to a point where it's like you pretend you're all cool with it, but really it's all building up inside to a bursting point where you're like, right.
Every question. Everything I've ever wondered.
Okay, now I have questions. The hell is going on?
Yeah. But I think it's also that point of like knowing how to ask questions like nicely, and like knowing how to ask, not necessarily always nicely, but like being confident in like how you're asking your questions. And there is like a sort of a confidence in being like, oh, well, I can ask questions about this. My curiosity is a good thing. And I think there are people who feel quite insecure about how to ask questions. And that's like something that I don't know any kids that are really in school. Yeah.
It's a learned thing. Well, I don't think school encourages you to ask questions. I mean, it didn't when I went to school. That was a long time ago. It might be very different now. I expect it not. I mean...
I hope it is. I'm going to be hopeful. I hope it is.
It's not very British, though, to encourage people to ask questions. It's more British to tell them to shut up and do as they're told. What are you doing that for? Why do you have expectations? Stop it.
Yeah. My brother got really frustrated at school because he had lots of questions, particularly about science. And the teachers did say, stop asking questions.
Yeah.
Because you don't need to know this. And he would be like,
I didn't get all this scientific knowledge by asking questions, you know. Just observe things and wrote them down.
Yeah. And I remember it being really frustrating for him because he didn't really understand why they wouldn't answer his questions.
It's more work. It's harder to answer the question than to ignore it.
Yeah.
And that's but you know, you have this discourse of laziness and stuff. It's like the laziness has always been there. And it's like, from the top down. Oh, I can't be asked. I could fix that, but I can't be asked. I'll blame somebody else for it, and that'll
Wow.
put out a press release. It's solved now. Good. New depths of cynicism with Simon.
No, I'm like, I'm not gonna give you my like, well, I'm an optimist return. I'm just gonna let you plummet now. You can just plummet.
Surprisingly under there, like there is a surprising amount of optimism, but yeah, actually, it's not very visible at the minute. So, well, then maybe.
Oh, sorry. What is nice is I have some friends who are teachers, and they do talk about how much they do to like encourage people in their classes to like encourage them to ask questions and encourage them to ask questions on their terms, and encourage this curiosity. So I hope it's changing.
I mean, I've said this a few times, but personally, I would have the school on a project model, not on subjects. So I would have it with the kids leading, and I would do this at a very early age. I wouldn't have to wait until secondary school or some nonsense like that. Get the kids, like the ideas come from the kids, right? We want to do that. What do you want to do? We want to make a thing. We want to make a space rocket. Okay, well, how big a rocket? What do you want to make it out of? And then you go into all of the various things from that, right? What's this? Where did it come from? How was it made? Who invented it? Like, detail. You can be really specific with it, or you can go off in all different angles, because everything is everything. You can jump from anywhere to anything. And it'd be amazing. Yeah, could you imagine if you went to school and like today was your day, and they're going to ask you for an idea, and even if you're a bit shy and stuff, and you kind of like, I don't know what to think of, and like, maybe people support you or encourage you or whatever. Your day, and then everyone's doing the thing that you want to do, and you find out about all these random things, and you're working together in a way that you don't know that you're being educated in all sorts of social skills and cooperation and team building, all that kind of stuff. Be great. I'd love to go to that school.
Yeah. Sounds pretty nice, to be honest. Yeah.
Or perfect school for me when I was in school was just a good amount of time in each lesson just for daydreaming. Because it's more important than whatever the teacher's saying is like some national curriculum nonsense.
And now we daydream. Now is your 10 minutes allotted for daydreaming, but only about geography. Simon, only daydream about geography.
No, well, of course, that's the only thing I am thinking of.
That's for the maths lesson, don't you know?
So I'm going to go to UBI. I'm assuming you're familiar with UBI. You're aware of the concept.
Yeah.
So if there was a universal basic income, how do you think that might change your work? I mean, you can think broadly, or you can think specifically about what you're doing now. I mean, you wanted more for the stipend for the PhD. If they brought it in, I'm imagining that would be helpful to you in this circumstance right now. And perhaps like you might even not do the part-time admin role. But you might, because you might want the money.
Maybe I could just have one wage that I could just support my family with. Wouldn't that be a dream? Wouldn't that be a dream? Like
a dream from long ago, in dark times.
Well, yes. So I am in favour of universal basic income, and I think yes, it would have a huge impact on people who do PhDs. But I also think in the museum sector, it would have a big impact as well. Museum jobs are incredibly underpaid at a range of levels, and there's an going back to sort of like the conversation earlier about like being bankrolled. There was some research a few years ago that looked at how come people who work in museums could afford to work in museums when you don't earn very much money. And basically it worked out that
they can't.
Well, the answer was either they can't, or they have a spouse who has a really highly paid job and is essentially bankrolling the entire sector. And that was very like instructive for me, because then, you know, you've got a highly then unsustainable sector that's totally, and also kind of like, is a bit immoral if your sector is based on, you know, women generally being married to, you know, I don't know, stockbrokers or whatever. I don't know. That's probably not a real example, but you know, it's very problematic.
People on 3-figure salaries.
Yeah.
3-figure
And
salaries.
this is like someone's PhD research that they came out with. So, you know, it's legit.
Or in some cases, just, you know, a kind of average wage, but their lifestyle has been reduced a lot so that this could be facilitated.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, you know, it's even worse, you know, for people who are working, you know, in places like visitor services, where, you know, some of the salaries can be very low. And so I think that could have a huge and positive impact in that entire sector. There's so many.
I was just going to say, the other thing is, because you're doing that whole sort of, you're then gendering that kind of work, which then means like you feminize that labor, which means that it gets paid less in the market. Like, so less people do it, so the wages don't go up. So it's that, you know, it's the downward spiral.
Yeah, absolutely. And organisations do take advantage of this, particularly national museums and national organisations. They will pay people as low as they possibly can, often under the recommended guidance, for example, that the Museums Association makes. And it's to drive people to the bottom, at the same time as saying, oh, for all of these underpaid jobs, we really want people from marginalised communities to apply and work in them. And it's like, well, you're essentially then devaluing that labour even further, when for that worker, you know, you're getting 2 for 1, because you're getting someone, you know, who's bringing this, you know, real world experience that you say that you want. And also they're doing the job that's, you know, outlined. And it's really outrageous. Like, I volunteer with an organisation called Fair Museum Jobs, and we try and speak out about these issues in the museum sector. But they are so common, and some organisations that are funded by, for example, Arts Council England or the National Lottery Heritage Fund continue to perpetuate these low salaries, which then continue to disadvantage people across the sector. So then you get to this point, you know, there is a lot of issues about lots of the people who work in museums are white and middle class. So you've got this like very narrow range of perspectives that are then trying to tell the stories, you know, of a huge and wonderful variety of culture and science and people and places.
And complexity.
And you know, you can't do it. You know, I say that as, you know, a white middle class woman who's worked in museums. You know, you can't do it. But then you only have this range of people who are being able to do it because of these low salaries. So, yeah, more money.
Yeah. I was like, oh, well, don't pay for them. Oh, well, don't pay for history. Don't pay for culture. Don't pay for your heritage. Don't spend any money on having any kind of society. Like, we live in a city. Well, what is the city about? Where did it come from? Like, do we not want to know any of these things? Does it not matter to anybody? Nobody cares. Nobody's interested in anything. They just want to make money and get drunk and fall asleep in a field or whatever. Like, what are we about here? I want to pay for museums and galleries and like good stuff in the city. I want to have things. That's why I'm in a city.
Yeah.
Start. If I didn't want stuff, like, and I just wanted to look at trees, I would be not living in the city.
No, you'd be in Walden. You'd have done your time on the stock market. You'd be at your pond. And the thing is that certainly for like some of like the free attractions, you know, lots of the people who use them are people who have some of the least money in the city. If they've got that, if they're at that point where they can get into town and they can get to the
spaces,
maybe
warmed.
Yeah, exactly. That's, you know, and that's where there's like real and like true value. And I talk about museums, but this could be libraries, this could be any other kind of cultural institution. It could be lots of those spaces that we've lost, like youth centres or community centres that are, you know, a bit more that are open a bit more. And it's,
Yeah. I mean, the thing, places have real people in them. And one of the other things that I like, and I'm coming more and more to this, is like anyone who's working with the public, like they are so vital and so undervalued, like coming off the key workers thing, like they are police, they are first aiders, like they are doing so many roles which should be like, they should be trained for these, and it should be supported in them. It's like, you shouldn't just have mental health first aid, they should have some security training, like, there's varying things of it, but it's like, these are people on the front line of society, quite literally, who are dealing with like everything all the time. Like I used to work in the Odeon in town, on the hedgerow, and you would get all sorts of things because you're right in the centre of town. You just got things stumbling into the building, events, incidents, all sorts of stuff happening, and and you get customer service jobs. You get paid really crap wages to do a job that's it's okay. I mean, the best side of it is like actually dealing with people, which is also the worst side of it. And very little appreciation for it, and it's so vital. And it's so formative to so many people's careers. Like it's first jobs for so many of us. Like it should be real
respect.
More value should be put on it. Yeah, like it's a real grounding for a lot of things, and it should be paid better.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? My first job was in a chip shop. And it really gave me like a really focused work ethic. And there were lots of like really interesting things I remember, and I've got really good memories of working there. But one of the things I remember, so this would be like 2000-ish, and I worked there for like 4 years, I think. And every summer, the same guy who was homeless would come through our village, and I happened to work, I think, like 3 shifts that he came on, and he always got free chips and like a free supper. And he came through, and it was the same people who worked there, and they remembered him, and they asked how he was, and they asked how he was going. And I remember one summer, the person that I worked with, Jane, she said, I can't remember quite how we referred to him, but she said, "Oh, he's not been. I wonder where he is." And he didn't come all summer, and we assumed that he'd passed away, and it just really made me think, who else was watching out for that guy, who's trundling around South Lincolnshire, and who else might be noticing, and you can then extrapolate that to any number of these places that are encountering people and noticing people. And my grandpa had dementia towards the end of his life, and there are a number of pubs in the town he lived who had my telephone number just in case he got a bit confused, and they could give me a call, and that goes unspoken and untalked about. All these like favors that people who are doing, and they're doing it out of kindness and out of goodness. And it's just, it's not valued in any kind of formal way. And because we don't talk about it really, it doesn't get respected in the way that it should.
So when I was living down in London, they put all of these, obviously infantilized posters up because, we're all children now. So they were all cartoons and stuff. But it was just like, maybe take your bag off the other seat and let other people sit down, and maybe, we live in a society, maybe act like it. So they put all these signs up, and they're really good. And they kind of work because we need reminding. It's not that we're all just stupid and we don't know how to live. It's like you forget stuff, and like you've got all sorts of nonsense going on in your head. And it's not always like, oh God, all the bills I've got to pay. Sometimes it's like just a bunch of adverts that are dancing around your mind, distracting you from like, more important things.
Yeah.
But I've lost my point again.
Being good to each other.
Yeah.
Public transport.
But like you say, talking about it more, talking like public service announcements, I think are important. And it's like, they are telling you obvious things, but there is no such thing as common sense. Like we don't all just know how to do whatever. And some people, not everybody's had the same experiences that we all assume everybody's had and we take for granted, you know. We all have different experiences. So yeah, tell people, like, this is how you're supposed to do this. Because then at least we know. And they're like, if it's wrong, we can argue with it or whatever. But it's like, if it's not there, then where's the standard? It's that whole thing of it's not written down, and we're back to bureaucracy and rule making again. Sorry, I'm being very ranty this morning.
No,
You can tell I've not seen many people for that.
Good. Let it out. Let it out.
So we've done most of UBI. Do you want to say any more on UBI?
No, I'm okay. I think, yeah.
Okay. So this is the point where I throw it over to you. So you can talk about anything you might want to talk about, or you can just give people your socials if people want to find out more about anything that you're doing, if you want to promote that.
So I think going back to what I was saying about working in the chip shop, I think one of the things that I started working there when I was like 15. And I think, and I see with people who are that age now, less and less opportunities to work, fewer and fewer ways that people can have, not necessarily like a big job, but fewer ways that people can earn some money.
And I think less interest in doing it. I think there's that thing of like, why would you want to be a paper boy when you could start your own influencer company training course?
I mean, like influencer training when I was 15, if influencer training had been a thing, I would have probably tried to do it, because I worked because I needed to save up money to go to university. I needed to have money for my fees and my accommodation before I went. And so I had these jobs and I had the opportunity to do that. And, you know, that motivation isn't for everyone. But I do think opportunities to earn should be available to everyone who needs them, and not in a way that's, you know, what do I mean? If you want to be able to work, you should be able to get like a small part-time job, 4 hours a week in a chip shop or wherever. And you should be able to use that to like learn about money and to like save or not save and make your decisions. And I think that should be part of a system where people are kind of like, people who can't work are protected, but where people who do want to work have opportunities that are appropriate for them. And I think I sometimes see the workplace, when I talk to people who work in different sectors or people who are, you know, stuck in jobs that they're not so happy with, you know, it feels to me like we've lost a bit of that mobility with working that there used to be.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think I would want that to see that change.
Some of that. So before 2008, like I started my working life in the 90s, in the middle of, you know, this huge global expansion of the economy as we build the infrastructure of the internet, because something real happened and something real had to be built. So some real growth happened and real jobs were around. So during that period where real stuff happened for a bit, there was lots of work, there was lots of jobs, there was lots of money around, there was lots of credit around. And you could always get a job. I was never bothered about a job. It was like, screw this job, I'll walk out of it. There'll be another way, you know, I'll get another job in a second. Post 2008, I still got that attitude because that's my experience, you know, and that's my experience of workplaces and so on. But, you know, I have been disciplined by the market also. So I know, you know, the reality is it's not that, you know, there are still jobs and I am in a position where I have some experience and I have a, you know, white male, like I've got a bunch of reasonable advantages, but it's still rubbish. It's still crap out there. The jobs are crap. The pay's crap. Like, you know, in most places, the level of training that they have, if they have anything, is crap. Like, so much of it. And it's worse up here than it is down south. And yeah, I think you're right. There should be all of that. But some of it is, well, I think is to do with things like there are far less places to do cash in hand jobs. There are, you know, and just the fact that, so when I started working, you still get I still got paid for my first few pays, actual money into my hand, not to my bank where the bank pays the money and have it and decide whether they let me have it or not. Like actual money into my hand that was mine. So yeah, like a lot of these sort of changes that we sort of, when times are good, you don't notice, and then times get not so good, and you kind of, why has the bank got all my money? Like, why is tax taken off me straight? Why is this happening? Why do I not get paid for my lunch anymore? Why has my pay not gone up at all, hardly, compared to the price of living and so on? Like, why has it gone down? And yeah, I don't know what my point is with that.
Yeah, but more opportunities to work and better pay, essentially.
Let's
do it.
Better pay. And this is the one that's undermined all the time. It's like, just pay people more. Honestly, it will make things so much better. It's just like, why has the executive, going back to the neoliberal thing of like in the museums and so on, the executives' pay's not gone down. In fact, it's got better than ever. Every institution, like neoliberalism is, fire all the people with knowledge and skills, replace them all with agency workers who don't know shit and don't have any power, and then give me all the money because I'm in charge and I'm the best. So that's worked. I'm great.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be working that well. Like,
I mean, it works for some.
Well, yeah,
a very few small select group people, but that seems to be the ones that vote. So
yeah, none of the rest of us vote. So such a funny correlation. Yeah, can't get the bus. Yeah. Well.
All right. So I'm gonna let you say whatever, and I'm not gonna add any bits on. Yeah, go on. Sorry. If you know where we were or what was
So I guess thanks for listening, people. Very awkward. If you are interested in coming and saying hello, and you have a profile on X, then my handle's at Lucy AJ Moore, MOORE. You can Google me, Lucy Moore, University of York, and that brings up a way to get in touch, brings up my email address. And if you see me out and about, say hello. And always ask for more money if you can.
Yes. And ideally do it in a group.
Yeah. What's the word for that, Simon? What's the word for that?
Collective bargaining or mugging.
Or a union.
Thank you again to Lucy for being my guest. Thanks as always to all my guests, and thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. If you'd like to know more about Lucy, you can find links for her in the show notes. And I also need to credit the photographer, Chris Tommond at The Guardian, for the photograph of Lucy used in the podcast art and promo art. If you'd like to speak to me about one of my guests or their interviews or what the hell I'm on about at any particular moment, or even about being a guest yourself, yes, you can do that. Let me know if you want me to expand on any points you feel I've glossed over in an interview or not explained enough. Any of those sorts of questions, anything at all. If you want to say, I don't know, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Are you wasting your time? Email workinghourspod@westernstudios.com. If you would like to make a podcast series, don't forget you can do that and support Working Hours by buying podcast services from me, Western Studios Leeds. Email makemypodcast@western-studios.com to do that. Website and social links for that are in the credits. I do already make a few shows for other people, but it would be good to pick up a few more. If you would like to buy Working Hours episodes outside of the main project, either as gift episodes for yourself or for others, or maybe you'd like to buy some additional clips or content from your own Working Hours episode or interview. If so, then let me know. If you want to make Working Hours yourself in your city, also get in touch. Remember, listener, no matter what you do, it's impossible for you to understand anything that your salary depends on you not understanding. Okay, that's me. Work for peace and plan with kindness. Cheers, ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios, Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Go to western-studios.com and use the contact page on the site to drop me a message about either Working Hours or about your own Leeds podcast project. Keep up to date with Working Hours and find out about the other great Leeds podcasts that Western Studios is involved with by following Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/western_studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. Western Studios Leeds is available to loaners to help them realise their own podcast projects for only £30 for an hour of audio podcast work or £40 for an hour of video podcast work. Email makemypodcast@western-studios.com with details of your project and what support you want to get your Leeds podcast made. Whatever your podcast question or need, get in touch with Western Studios Leeds.